Hi, everyone. I'm Lex. Today, we're going to talk about everything you need to know to get started with product analytics. Before we get started, I've put up all the resources that I share at the end of the talk on my website at lexroman.com/resources. I'm Lex. You can find me at Collexity and also at lexroman.com. I'm a product designer by trade, and my focus is on growth. So I call myself a growth designer. When I started my career, I started by working with companies that wanted to optimize some metric. I worked with really early stage founders that wanted to do everything from optimize donations to sell more products to get more people on their email list. And I learned really early on that you can't do any of that work without reliable data. So I've spent a lot of my career helping companies instrument events, choose tools, and I'm going to walk you through all of my process today. In this talk, we're going to go over all the things you need to know to get started with product analytics, everything from picking those tools to creating reports. Let's start with choosing tools. If there's one message I want you to take away from this talk, it's to make things easy on yourself and your team. When you're looking for tools, you want tools that are going to be dead simple to use. You want them to be flexible, and you want to make sure that you're going to get the most out of them. I always recommend that folks look at Segment's integration catalog because it contains the latest set of analytics that folks are using. Segment is so widely used now that their integration catalog is a fantastic resource. And you can sort by popularity, you can filter for all kinds of tags. My tool of choice is Amplitude, but there's plenty of tools here to pick from and to look into. As you're evaluating tools, look for tools that are easy to understand, easy to get around, with clear labels and easy navigation. This is just a screenshot from Amplitude. You can see on the left, it's pretty straightforward how to move around this tool and create charts. Choose tools that allow you and your team the flexibility to slice views different ways. Again, in an example from Amplitude, I can filter by different events, and I can segment my audience on the right side by almost anything I can come up with. One thing that I think is huge, especially when you're trying to improve data literacy on your team, is choosing tools that allow you to embed documentation right within them. So rather than having to keep a whole separate spreadsheet or a whole separate set of docs, you can put the definitions and the information right there. So right here, I'm hovering over an event, and on the right side, I can see exactly what that event means. It's incredibly valuable, especially when you're onboarding new folks onto your team. And lastly, look for tools that make it easy to collaborate. Tools that have complex permissions or make it hard to share charts, that isn't what you want for a team, right? You want a tool that really allows you to create open data and encourage that collaboration. When you share a link, it should be accessible to your teammates. So just a reminder, think about these things when you're looking at tools. Check out that Segment integration catalog and think about these as you evaluate them. Next, we're going to talk about how to create your tracking plan. One of my favorite pieces of advice is not to track everything that you can think of, but really to just track on what you're going to act on. When you're thinking about creating your first tracking plan, or maybe reevaluating your existing one, start with the project goal that you have top of mind. Then break it down into all the pieces that create that goal. So what are all the interactions that someone has to take in order to meet that goal in your product? Then you might want to think about different ways you want to segment your audience. And lastly, you want to be really careful about what you track about people. There's all kinds of frameworks out there for helping you identify goals. I'm not going to cover them in this talk, but check these out if you need help identifying what those key metrics should be. But let's say, for example, you wanted to increase subscriptions. So you take that metric that you have and you break it down. You do a walkthrough of your product, or you sketch a user journey and you say, this is how you get to that goal. So we want to increase subscriptions. Here are all the steps in order to subscribe. And then just write out a little story, label them. Viewed subscription, that's when you click on that initial tile. Selected subscription, that's when you click on the button. Added to cart, checkout, and so on. This becomes your initial critical path, your first set of tracking events. Besides events, you might also want to think about, what do you want to look at for your audience? So some things you get out of the box with analytics tools, things like city, browser, but you might want to know, where are people coming in from? Where's their referral from? You might want to know something specific to your product. Like in the case of the plant subscription, maybe you want to know if someone's a plant lover or not. Maybe that's a question that you're asking in your sign-up flow. Maybe you want to know what kind of payment someone's using, what kind of customer they are for you. There's all kinds of things that might be relevant to your business. Think about just a couple when you're getting started, and you can add those as user properties in your tracking plan. I just want to mention again, it's really important to not track personal information. All of these things count as personal information. Be very careful when you're taking in data, and make sure that none of this is making it in to your tracking plan. Just to bring these back again, always start with a goal and just take one critical path that gets you to that goal and start breaking it down. It just takes a few events to get started. Now let's talk about how you actually instrument those events. So you've thought about your goal, you've broken it into a user journey. Now you want to fire some events off. How do you do that? I want to highlight, humans are looking at these events. Sometimes when I look at the events that companies are firing, they look like they're written for a computer. So I just want to bring forward, it's important to remember that humans are reading this information. So as you're instrumenting, think about naming. Think about the ways that you might want to slice an event. Maybe there's more detail that you want than just the event that gets fired. And also think about how you can reuse it. You don't want every single event in your tracking plan to be named something uniquely. You want some things to be following some kind of convention that you can reuse. I always like to say, when you're naming an event, think about how you'd say it out loud to someone. So for example, for my plant subscription, I might say they selected a subscription. So I'll call this event selected subscription. Pretty straightforward. Now, maybe I want to know what kind of subscription they got. Is it a gift? I see here that they can make it a gift. Do I want to know if it's a gift or not? Maybe I also want to know what kind of planter they got or what kind of plants they're going to get. So I can add all these things as event properties. And again, you want to be careful here and only track information you're actually going to use, because it becomes very messy very quickly if you just add everything you can think of. So think about your goals. Think about what you can act on. Am I going to do anything with this information? If yes, track it. If no, hold off. You can always send it later. And then one thing to think about, especially early on, when you're instrumenting flows, how can I reuse this? So in this case, I'm reusing the term selected to mean the kind of purchase mode that you're picking. But maybe I want to use something like started and completed. Think about, what are those different conventions that make sense, that are repeatable loops that you might want to reuse. Just considering that at the beginning of your tracking plan can make it a whole lot easier once your company gets bigger. Naming is really important. Make sure that everything is really clear. And think about maybe dummy proofing stuff. Just like, is there a way someone could misread this? Maybe I could name it something that's more straightforward. So now you have your tracking plan. You've instrumented some of those events. Now you want to create some reports. One thing that's really powerful about product analytics, tools like Amplitude and Mixpanel, is that you can look at your data through multiple lenses. You don't just have to take someone else's view on data. Say someone makes a SQL query and puts it in Looker. You don't have to necessarily just take that at face value. In a tool like Amplitude, you can slice it multiple ways, which can add more color and allow you to unlock ways that you can grow your product. So a few things to think about when you're making reports. I like to start with a question. For example, for my plant subscription business, where are people going when they bail on a subscription? I might like to know that, right? As a growth person, I want to get more subscribers. So what's happening to those folks? From there, I can make a chart like this that allows me to see where people went after they did something at the beginning of a funnel. So they selected a subscription. I want them to do that. But then some folks changed their payment type and then went back to the homepage. Other folks added it to the cart. Some folks viewed how it works. So viewing a chart like this can really answer my question and isn't just a straightforward funnel or segmentation view. It's a little bit more complex, but it came from my question. Where are they going? Another thing that's important when you're looking at charts of any kind, charts you create, charts that others create, is thinking about the time frames. So in this chart, we have 2 time frames. One is the conversion window, which here is 7 days. And the other is the date range, which is just how many days are shown on the chart. So it's important to think about what's the shortest conversion window you can apply to a chart? What cadence makes sense for your product? How long would someone take to do those actions? And then in terms of the view, do you want to look at it daily, weekly, monthly, and making sure that your events are firing in that date range, and that you're getting some information that actually makes sense for what you're looking for. So just always walking through your chart and saying, this is what I think this is saying. This is the correct date range. It makes sense to do it in this time frame. Just double checking all that stuff whenever you're making a report or looking at a report someone sends you. And then lastly, highly recommend annotating and labeling your charts to help yourself remember what the chart means and to help your colleagues find and understand your charts. So I always like to fill in every field. If there's available fields for descriptions, I like to tag things. I like to put in product plans or experiment plans in these boxes. And in a tool like Amplitude, you can rename things in your chart that might be confusing to folks. So I always recommend doing that and just making things as clear and as simple to read. Just a few things to think about when you're making reports. You can make all kinds of views, but if you start with the right question, you can find the answer rather than starting with that solution chart and backing into a question. On that note, I wanted to highlight how you can learn and iterate from the data that you're gathering. It's really important to just always reflect with your team and say, is this data helping us? Are we getting what we need out of this information? Here's a few ways to do that. The first way is to talk with folks from different departments. Ask folks from different teams, or ask your colleagues just from different disciplines. How are you using data? What do you find clear and intuitive? What's confusing to you? What would you like to see? What would you like to be able to use? How could we make this better for you? Collecting that diverse range of perspectives, it strengthens your tool selection, your tracking plan, and most importantly, the decisions that you make off your data. In order to stress test your data, compare different sources. So you might want to compare your data warehouse to your product analytics tool, or vice versa. Look at something that someone else is using as a source of truth and see if it matches your new tracking plan. Is that working? Is that event mapping? Is the count the same? Checking that can really help ensure that everyone finds the data reliable and that the data is actually reliable. So it's important to be constantly having that feedback loop of all of your data sources. Are they lining up? What are we using different data sources for? And what can we trust? And then lastly, how is this serving your overall goals? Are you hitting your metrics? Are you able to get information you can act on? Is it improving your business? This is an important question and one that's often missed. But ultimately, the reason we're tracking all this information about customers is so that we can grow our companies and have more impact. So ask yourself, is your data infrastructure doing that for you? Just a few things to think about. One simple question: how is this working for us? How is this serving us? Wanted to highlight a few resources I find really helpful. I have a really simple event taxonomy template, and it's linked at the end, so you can use it when you're creating your tracking plan to just help keep all of those events straight. Segment created this thing called Analytics Academy, which is a phenomenal course that breaks down everything you need to know when you're creating an analytics program at your company. So it's so detailed, it's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. 2 articles in particular I really like. The one about naming conventions. Can't emphasize this enough. It's a huge win when you get this right early on. And then this article about scalable data governance, which highlights the importance of data quality, which again is a thing I see growth companies struggling with over and over again. The data becomes unwieldy, it becomes messy, it becomes impossible to use. So focusing on these 2 aspects early can really help you get ahead. Amplitude has an awesome playbook called Data Taxonomy Playbook, which also breaks down how to do the taxonomy definition and how to do instrumentation. And lastly, Practico Analytics has a killer blog post that breaks down a lot of information about how to do product analytics. I've linked all of this and more on my website, lexroman.com/resources. Thank you for watching my talk.